thought it would be a good time to take a look back at Blizzard's devilish franchise and see how it came to be what it is today. So pick your class and get ready to find some epic loot in the history of Diablo. Before we spent hours upon hours fighting back the forces of evil across Sanctuary, there was a man named David Brevik. In the mid-90s, David founded a dev studio called Condor Games with Max and Eric Schaefer. One of the studio's first projects was aiding in the development of the Sega Genesis version of a DC superhero fighting game called Justice League Task Force, which was also being worked on by Japanese studio Sunsoft. In the midst of that game's development, David got the gears spinning on a concept he had been talking about for years with Max and Eric. They wanted to create a gothic, roguelike, turn-based RPG with procedurally generated dungeons, graphics, and sound specifically for the PC, but one that would get players into the action very quickly. What was the rush? Well, as a kid, David spent some time playing Dungeons & Dragons. What a nerd, am I right? However, David wasn't there for the fleshed out stories of adventures or heroes and their triumphs over evil. No. David was there for the simple, sweet action and loot. But unfortunately, he had to sit through all the boring story stuff before he could roll for his next Vorpal sword. His game concept was born out of his childhood need for action and loot now. In that era, role-playing games were typically committed to the Dungeons & Dragons style of roleplay, where you had to answer a bunch of questions and give your character a backstory before you could get down to business. Additionally, the games that inspired and drove David were not exactly roguelike games, and they kind of look like this. Yeah, if you're wondering why I said David's plan was to create a game with graphics and sound rather than good graphics and sound, this is what I meant. His project was being designed to be the next generation of these great ASC2 roguelike games from the 80s, effectively bringing the genre into the 90s. The vision was to have full color graphics in an isometric perspective so the player could fully appreciate the character, monster, and environmental designs while also being able to navigate the world fairly easily. Inspired by the game series' shockingly low time to gameplay, David also sought to cut out all of the questions and backstory by giving players a handful of predetermined character classes to select from. With this system, players would be able to pick a character and start playing, as simple as that. Speaking on the shift his project took from traditional RPGs, David Brevik had some choice words. We just wanted to get in and start smashing things. But what would the incentive be to continue to smash things, other than the sheer fun of smashing things? Well, the other facet of David's original game concept paid off another of his D&D dreams as a child, an expansive loot system he lovingly calls the Loot Lottery. David has described the Loot Lottery like this. Every time you kill a monster, you put a quarter in the slot machine and you pull the lever. Out can come nothing, then you get your quarter back. Or you could do pretty well, you could hit a jackpot. When it came time to give his action and loot-packed project a name, David only had to look outside his window. He named his game Diablo, after Mount Diablo in Northern California, the area he called home while the project was in its infancy. Even knowing what we know now, Diablo sounds pretty cool, right? Games like this were few and far between back then, so you might assume game publishers were clambering over each other to put their names on Diablo. However, this was far from the case. When David and the rest of Condor began pitching their in-development game to publishers, they were almost universally rejected, with the same statement from every publisher they visited: RPGs are dead. To make matters worse, Condor as a studio didn't have any PC game development experience, having only worked on console games previously. This didn't do them any favors when they pitched their PC-only RPG, but that part of the deal was non-negotiable. The SNES and Sega Genesis were approaching the end of their respective roads, and the future was uncertain for the next generation of consoles. Nobody wanted to risk spending time, effort, and money developing for something that might fail at launch. The only constant in the world of gaming then, and I guess now as well, was the PC. Regardless of operating system, people would always play games on their PC. For that reason, David and the team decided that a PC game would be a safer bet. So a PC game Diablo needed to be. While they were trying to get Diablo off the ground, Condor was still responsible for Justice League Task Force. In June 1994, the team flew out to Las Vegas for CES to demonstrate their work on the Sega Genesis version. However, the Wily Bunch also took the opportunity to pitch Diablo to the many publishers who were also present at the show. After being turned down by no less than 10 major publishers or suits who were unable to grasp the magnitude of what they were doing, Condor Games struck gold. Returning to the Sunsoft booth dejected, the Condor team was surprised to find another version of Justice League Task Force being demoed, one they were completely unaware of, a version created by a little company called Blizzard Entertainment. The members of Condor, led by David Brevik, and Blizzard, led by Alan Adham, immediately hit it off. Alan even showed the Condor guys a work-in-progress game that went on to become Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, and later sent them builds they could play at their own offices. David immediately knew these Blizzard guys were for real. These people weren't just suits, they were gamers, just like him and his team. They would be able to see his vision. So, going out on a limb, David reached out to Alan to see if Blizzard wanted to publish Diablo. And they did. About 3 months into Diablo's development, Blizzard Entertainment agreed to publish Diablo, but with two very specific conditions. The game would need to be real-time, not turn-based, and it would also need to have multiplayer. These weren't just random demands, rather these were the things that were added during Warcraft's development that seemed to play a role in its success. David pushed back hard on the real-time gameplay, fearing that it would 1. Take too much time to implement, and 2. It would change the game's core experience. But being a good leader, he put the change to a team vote for the fate of Diablo. And the vote to keep the turn-based gameplay lost by a wide margin. He had preemptively warned Blizzard that the change to real-time could take a month and that they would need to get more funding to get it done, but it turns out David might have overestimated what it would take by a lot. The very same day that the vote took place, David sat down at his desk and began tinkering with Diablo to see how difficult it would be to convert it into real-time. Within hours, he had enough of the game worked out to actually be playable, and he was astounded at how good it felt to play in this format. He knew right away that this version of the game was way better. By the time 1996 rolled around, the now real-time roguelike Diablo was well into development. But that wasn't the only good news to come out of that year. Seeing the work that Condor was doing and the potential of what Diablo could be, Blizzard acquired Condor Games and renamed them Blizzard North. Blizzard Entertainment was also then renamed to Blizzard South to distinguish the two studios. Now the final piece of the puzzle needed to be put into place: Diablo's multiplayer. Not wanting to rely on the online gaming infrastructure that was available at the time, like the subscription-based Total Entertainment Network that powered games like Duke Nukem 3D and Command & Conquer, Blizzard began developing their own online service to power Diablo's multiplayer, Battle.net. Unfortunately, when Blizzard South checked in to see how Diablo's multiplayer code would work within Battle.net, there was no multiplayer code, because Blizzard North had no idea how to write that kind of code. Blizzard South sent up employees to help develop the Diablo multiplayer and make sure it would work with Battle.net over the last 6 months of the game's development. Then, finally, Diablo hit store shelves on January 3rd, 1997. It was expected to sell modestly at launch, with early estimates settling at around 100,000 copies. However, after the press got hands-on with pre-release builds and starting to get the word out about how sick Diablo was, those same estimates exploded to 500,000 copies. About a month before launch, pre-orders alone had surpassed 450,000 copies. It's probably no surprise, but Diablo topped PC game sales charts for the first several months of 1997, until it was dethroned by X-Wings vs. TIE Fighter in May, which is fine because that game also rocks, like, really hard. Future video maybe. Blizzard had unleashed a juggernaut into the gaming world that apparently could not be stopped, and their parent company wanted to keep the gravy train a-rolling. Against Blizzard's wishes, David and Associates, the company that effectively owned both Blizzard studios, allowed a single-player expansion to Diablo to be developed and released by Synergistic Software in November of 1997. Just 10 months after Diablo's release, in fact, the expansion was greenlit and in development when Blizzard South's Alan Adham went away on vacation. Blizzard North was already digging into Diablo 2's development when the expansion called Hellfire was in the works. And since they couldn't say no to the people who provided the money for their development, they elected to executive produce the game and help Synergistic get it out on time, while also putting certain limitations on it so that it didn't overlap with Diablo 2 or mar the experience of Diablo. Most notably, Blizzard North didn't want Synergistic to include Battle.net multiplayer in Hellfire, saying that it would require them to rebalance Diablo's multiplayer, something they did not have time for. Unfortunately, Synergistic did develop and include multiplayer in Hellfire, along with several other unsanctioned Easter eggs, which incurred the wrath of both Blizzards. Despite being a finalist for the Best Add-on by Computer Gaming World in 1998, Synergistic software was shut down shortly after Hellfire was released. Aside from that expansion, a PlayStation 1 version of Diablo was also released in 1998, published by Electronic Arts and developed by Climax Studios. Back on the Blizzard side of Diablo development, Diablo 2 was slated to hit the market in the first quarter of 1998 under project lead Eric Schaefer. However, the game was essentially built from scratch, using less than 1% of the original Diablo code, so Diablo 2 actually took closer to 3 years to finish development and was released in June of 2000. An expansion to Diablo 2, completely designed and developed by Blizzard North, was released a year later in June of 2001. Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction revamped gameplay for single and multiplayer, and added 2 new character classes and weapons along with a 5th act for the campaign. Both Diablo 2 and its expansion continued the legacy of greatness established by the original game. And then came a long wait. Diablo 3 was announced in June of 2008, but it actually began development around the same time as Lord of Destruction, and then the game didn't get released until May of 2012. So what happened? Why did it take so long? Well, Blizzard North worked on Diablo 3 from roughly 2000 to 2005, when some drama began to unfold. In June of 2003, there was a falling out between Blizzard North and their parent company, now Vivendi, which purchased David & Associates and Sierra Online, the owner of Synergistic Software, which resulted in roughly 30 employees leaving the company. The very people behind the creation of Diablo, David Brevik, and the Schaefer brothers were among those that left. They all went on to form a new dev company, Flagship Studios, and work on their own projects. The remainder of Blizzard North worked on Diablo 3 with the help of Blizzard South for 2 years, but Vivendi was still not happy with how the game's development was progressing. So, on August 1st, 2005, Blizzard North was shut down. The work on Diablo 3 was scrapped, and the reorganized Blizzard Entertainment began work on what would be the final version. It would appear that the Diablo hype never died down over the course of the 11 years between Diablo 2 and 3, because Diablo 3 sales were off the charts. It sold 3.5 million copies on its first day on sale, becoming the fastest selling PC game for the time. It was also the best-selling game of 2012, with more than 12 million copies sold. 12 million in 2012. I feel like that's some prophecy come to life. This was all despite controversies involving the game's always-on DRM that made an offline single-player experience impossible, as well as the real money auction house that was intended to stop gold sellers and hackers, but in reality, what it did was make it possible for players to buy their own power with cash rather than playing for it. Fun fact, I knew someone who got a legendary sword and sold it for $350 and then stopped playing the game immediately because they're like, that's winning. The real money auction house was shut down 2 years after launch, with a statement from Blizzard production director John Hitt saying it undermines Diablo's core gameplay. 2 expansions were released for Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls and Rise of the Necromancer, and Diablo made its first console appearance in over a decade in September of 2013 when it launched for PS3 and Xbox 360. PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch versions came in the following years. And that brings us up to today, where we're eagerly awaiting and then there was Diablo Immortal in 2022. Who could forget this little piece of gaming history?
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
Snubbing the very community that put you on the map in the first place, that doesn't seem like a very cool thing to do, just throwing that out there. Blizzard seems to be doing everything they can to make it up for their past sins, because Diablo 4 looks fantastic. It might even make me forget all that money I spent on microtransactions in Diablo Immortal, at least for a little bit. And while we're all smashing demons and collecting out loot, let's give a thought to David Brevik and Max and Eric Schaefer. They haven't been involved in any Diablo projects for almost 20 years, but we wouldn't be sitting here for the 4th installment of this awesome series without their vision and the drive to make something great. You can check out David's self-developed and published game, It Lurks Below, or any of the titles from Skystone Games, the video game publishing house he co-founded. As for Max and Eric Schaefer, Max is currently the VP of Zynga, and Eric is the Chief Creative Officer of Moonbeast Entertainment, where he is working on the studio's first game alongside a fellow Diablo teammate, Bill Schenk. And that's where we're at. I'm excited for Diablo 4, and if you are too, let me know if you were able to check out that beta in the comments below.